Yeah, last week I brewed my Belgian Golden Strong. It's been in the fermenter for a week now, and it's coming along just fine. Today we're going to do a Saison, which is another Belgian style ale. It's considered a farmhouse ale. A little bit less on the grains because it's a lower gravity beer, meaning the ABV will be 1.5% less probably than the Belgian Golden Strong, maybe 2% less. Yeah, it's definitely a lighter beer than the Belgian Golden Strong, but they're both fantastic, and we're looking forward to bringing you the action. Here's another little thing that discussed, I guess, last week possibly, about we bring our strike water up to 180, and by the time we get the grains in, that usually gets us somewhere between 150 to 152. That's a volume issue with the grains. Of course, if your grains are stored cold or hot, that's going to give you a little bit of a fluctuation, which is not great necessarily, but as long as you are mashing in somewhere between 148 and 154, you're okay. Of course, the lower you get. All right, so we've had to let our strike water cool down a little bit, down to around 180. So we're getting ready to start that process. But the method that we're using is brew in a bag, which is a food grade bag. It's pervious, so liquid can flow in and out. Basically what that does, it keeps the fines from the grains. When you grind the grains, you kind of end up with a little bit of dust, and we just try to keep that out of our wort. It's a whole process that we use. You know, as we boil off, we are also filtering out fines, but that's later in the process. So this is what our bag looks like right here. Like I said, it's see-through. I don't know how they do it exactly, but anyway, we're going to go ahead and start putting our sparge water in. We're going to be using 4.5 gallons. We started with 7.5, so we're going to bring it down. I guess that would be to 3. A little bit of quick math there. Anyway, that's where we're at right now, and we'll be putting the grains in here shortly and get them stirred in. Make sure that clumpy and lumpy don't show up. So yeah, what I just mentioned, clumpy and lumpy, is a term that I used last week. So that's, I think we all know what that means when it comes to, like, say, an oatmeal, or even if you don't, it's a clump or a lump. I don't know why I added the Y, but anyway, let me just show you. This is, you know, kind of clumpy and lumpy, which is definitely something that we do not want. So we'll stir this in thoroughly and then put the lid on and let it mash in for an hour. We're probably going to be somewhere around 148 to 150 with our mash temperature, which is good for this particular style. We mashed in a little bit higher last week with our Belgian Golden Strong, just to give it potentially a little bit more body and a little bit of a residual sweetness. Even though we use the candied sugar to dry it out, it kind of gives it a balance. It's just the way we like to do that style. So we've got our lid on. We basically have a bungee on our bag that we brew in. We're not brewing in it, but we're mashing in. Brew in the bag is kind of a technical term that I don't know why. So yeah, our mash temperature is 151, which is a little bit warmer than I thought, but you know, we're talking a degree or two here. It's not a big deal. Yeah, it's science, but it's not an exact science. You can definitely work with that. All right, we're moving on to the next phase of the brew. We're basically adding water to our wort to bring it up to the proper levels before we transfer to the boil kettle, which we're already doing that right now. I'll just kind of show you what we got going on. Here's our pumps and hoses. We basically have our warmish water in here. There's our mash tun. We're coming from the warm water into the mash tun, and then into the boil kettle. So this is just kind of rinsing the grains off pretty well. Like I said, bringing our water levels up properly. And here is the kettle cam going into the... All right, we're boiling at this point. It goes through a process called hot break, which usually you get a lot of foam, for lack of a better word. I assume that's eliminating oxygen, but I'm not really sure. I'm not exactly a scientific guy. But anyway, as you can see, we're at boiling, and we're boiling. We're going to slow this down. We don't want it to boil that hard. Yeah, we're going to turn the heat down just a little bit. We're going to add our first hop addition with 30 minutes to go, and the second with 10 minutes to go. All right, we've got 30 minutes to go in the boil. We're getting ready to add our bittering hops. Last week we used Hallertau Blanc and Styron Golden. Hallertau Blanc is a German hop, and Styron Golden is Slovenian. Both of them are really nice. Probably should go into a little more details about what kind of flavors you'll get from that. Hallertau Blanc, you definitely get some white grape, maybe a little bit of peach. Some people say gooseberry. In fact, I think it says that on the package. Yeah, lemongrass, fresh lemongrass. Ooh, pineapple. Styron Golden, I don't have information on that, but I should probably look into that. I know it's very nice. It's typically used in Belgian beers. East Kent and Styron Golden. East Kent is a UK hop, and again, Styron Golden is Slovenian. So anyway, the other one we're adding to today's Saison is Saison, which is from the Czech Republic. It's a super nice hop when it comes to flavor and aroma, and I need to look at that up too. I used to know, but looks like I've showed up to a brew day to record unprepared. So anyway, here we are going in the hop basket with our Saison. We're not going to put all of them in there. We're going to split them and use the other half toward the end with 10 minutes to go. All right, so I looked it up on the Styron Goldens, which is not relevant to this week, but last week's Belgian Golden Strong. We've got stone fruit, herbal, spicy, berry, grassy, floral, and tropical. All right, we're down to 10 minutes in the boil on my Saison, and I've looked up about Saaz hops. Their primary flavors are earthy, spicy, and floral notes. Aroma is mild and pleasant, and herbal with a hint of fruit. So the 10-minute edition is really going to give you a little more flavor than aroma, but it also imparts aroma, which is definitely important in your beer. Obviously, as the old saying goes, you drink with your eyes. You do everything with your eyes first, whether it's food, other people, automobiles, home. It's like there's an attraction there. That looks good. What does it smell like? What does it taste like? So yeah, and I'm referring to beer here, of course. So yeah, I just wanted to throw that in. And here's the last hop addition of the day. All right, so back to the hops, and I wish I had saved some so I could kind of show you what they look like. It's basically it's a type of plant, of course. Most of the hops in the U.S. are grown in Washington State in the Yakima Valley, And I suppose they grind them after they harvest them. There's a whole process there, of course, but then they a lot of times end up as pellets. That's what home brewers use, at least. I know some professional brewers use whole cone hops, but I know they also use pellets as well. So it's basically almost ground to a powder and then compressed into a pellet. So part of the reason for using a hop basket to keep the plant matter out of the beer is it really expands a great deal and turns into a wet powder almost. So you end up with a lot of that floating in your beer, which is something that I prefer to keep out before the fermentation. And I also, to prevent a lot of the proteins from floating, not just in hops, but just the proteins that you're left over from malt, you use something called a whirlflock tablet. There's other ways to basically fine the beer. It's considered finings. Some of this is made from fish gill, which sounds weird, but it's exactly what it sounds like. It basically coagulates the proteins into separate little blobs, if you will. And I'll show you what that looks like in the hydrometer. You probably noticed it last week, like what are those gel-like substances floating, and that's basically what it is. And then it settles out to the bottom during primary fermentation, and then you pull it off and put it into secondary fermentation, so you can get it off whatever proteins and just matter is left from the yeast. Obviously yeast reproduce, so you end up with a lot more yeast than you originally started with. So you just get it off of anything that's left and then let it sit for 2 more weeks and settle out completely, so you've got a much cleaner beer when you go to package it. Which that's a whole nother thing that we'll talk about soon, because I'm going to be packaging some of this in 3 weeks, because I brewed the Belgian Golden Strong last week, and 4 weeks for this Saison, because it's brewing today. Whirlflock tablets, this is what they look like. Like I said, there's other ways to find beer. This is what I use, and it's a tablet originally, and I just basically put it in a bowl and break it up before I drop it in the beer, or what I'm brewing here. Ooh, that's hot. Yeah, and then that'll do its thing. All right, we've got our Saison in the fermenter and have taken our original gravity, which basically means how many sugars remain in the beer. We've come in at 1.048, and we'll hopefully dry out to around 1.006, which will give us about a 5.2, 5.3% ABV Saison, which is just about perfect in my opinion. So a little bit more about the coagulating of the proteins with the Whirlflock tablets. I'm going to show you the hydrometer, and because you can kind of see how this stuff coagulates and then settles out. So here's our reading, 1.048, almost 1.05. You see it's starting to get a little transparent, but there's also clumps in there, and it's already settling to the bottom just in the hydrometer after being in there for only 5 minutes. All right, so that's it for today. We'll keep you updated on the progress of both the beers, and we'll see you next time. After a few more minutes in the hydrometer, it has really started to separate. I'm going to show you that again and then leave you alone for the day. It's going to be a nice clean beer. Hey, what's going on? Getting ready to bottle my Saison, and just wanted to follow up with you with where we're at. Primary fermentation was 3 weeks, secondary was 2, and I let it crash, if you will, or clarify a little bit. It's only at about 60 degrees, so that's not really considered crashing. You would probably need to be around 35 or 40 degrees for that. But anyway, it's clarified pretty well. I've got the same setup here for my Belgian Golden Strong fermentation bucket, going into the bottling bucket using a siphon, and I've taken a gravity reading, and you really can't see it, but that's 1.000, which is dry, and it is every bit of that and maybe then some. So anyway, that's attenuated really well. I don't know if it's too much or not. We'll see if there's any residual sweetness to it. But I wanted to show you that before I poured it into a glass. Of course, it's not carbonated yet, so we'll have to wait a little bit for that. But I want to get a taste of it and see what's going on, and make sure it's good enough to bottle. I'm sure it is, but if you recall in the Belgian Golden Strong video, I had a little issue with my heat wrap on the fermentation bucket. It was at like 92 for about 10 days. So that's not normal. That shouldn't affect the color in my mind. But anyway, we're gonna get it in a glass, taste it. I'm not smelling anything that's wrong, so we should be good. Once I get it bottled, I'll kind of show you that. I don't want to run through that again. All right, so I've got it in a glass, and I don't think anything's wrong with it. I'm wondering if some of the wrong type of grains might have made it in there. Where I buy the grains, my homebrew stuff, but I'm just not sure. But let me show you what it looks like. It should be kind of a pale gold, but as you see, it's not. It's almost like apple cider without the taste, the color of apple cider. It's got a pretty good bitterness, some spiciness. I think I like the yeast. It's my first time trying this yeast. Yeah, I think once it gets carbonated, it should be good, even though it's not necessarily going to look like a Saison, but that's okay. Just a quick reminder, when I go to clean and sanitize these buckets, I'll really just clean them this time. A Saison uses a diastatic yeast, or at least I do, and that's not something that you want in your regular ales because it will really dry them out. I've never had a beer be quite this dry before, but I think it's going to be okay again. But anyway, I'm going to use a lot of hot water in this, which I use separate vessels when I have a diastatic yeast. I think I talked about that before, but I still like to clean everything really well, especially the siphon and the bottling wand. I think that's what it's called. We talked about that last time. Anyway, yeah, that's just following up on that to make sure that I was clear of that process. Anyway, we'll show you what it looks like when it's done. It's nothing special, but it'll carbonate in a couple of weeks. But I usually let these things mature for about 12 weeks before that really hits their sweet spot. I'll get into it before then, maybe at about 10 weeks. Might do a tasting on the Belgian Golden Strong and the Saison at the same time. This Saison's 2 weeks behind the Belgian Golden Strong, so that would be 12 weeks on the BGS. and 10 weeks on the Saison. And I'd mentioned I was going to talk about glassware, which is important for presentation, per style. I won't get off in the weeds in that, but I at least want to talk about it because it's part of these types of beers, is to have proper glassware. Really, that's what you see at any brewery. They have some sort of glassware. A lot of them focus on it more than others, which is fine either way. A lot of people don't care, but it is part of it. It's part of a process from developing your recipe to brewing your beer, choosing your yeast, your temperature, what temperature you ferment out, and how you serve it, and even at what temperature you serve it at. That is part of the process of, I mentioned sophisticated before, talking about the beer, which I don't know if that's probably a little bit too much of a word, but I can't think of another one. So anyway, we'll talk more about that when we do the tasting on the Belgian Golden Strong and the Saison, just to give you as much information as possible, at least the way I like to do it. And I didn't invent any of this, of course, so I'm just kind of following what others do, particularly from the country of Belgium. That's really what inspired me. Belgian style beers is the style that I love to brew. So anyway, we'll pick up with that next time, and I appreciate you watching. Like and subscribe if you will, and we'll see you soon. All right, here we are. Finished bottling the Saison. Like I said, I'm going to let it, it'll take 2 weeks to carbonate, but I'm going to let it mature for 10 to 12 weeks. Don't like and subscribe. Don't do it. Okay, do it. For real, if you like the content, I'd appreciate it. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.